listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you, and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive today, new research shows female voters are fleeing both the major parties as the federal election race heats up. We chat with political expert Sam Maiden, who says while Mr Dutton may have a female problem, the Prime Minister now has an issue with young male voters, with Australia going through one of the biggest political shake-ups in history. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Monday, the 24th of March. Teal Independent Monique Ryan's partner has apologised after being filmed taking down a rival candidate's campaign sign. Peter Jordan was caught on camera removing Amelia Hammer's poster in the Melbourne seat of Kooyong, claiming it wasn't legally placed.
It's a legally put up sign. If you want to put up a legal sign, anyone will take it down.
Who are you acting on behalf of?
I'm not acting on behalf of anyone, mate.
It seems like you
are. It's a legal sign, and if you put up illegal signs, they'll be taken down.
Mr Jordan says he is sorry, promising to leave the poster policing to council. Meantime, the federal government has announced it will bring forward $1 billion in defence spending in tomorrow night's budget. As the US tariff fallout continues along with regional security concerns, critics have argued Australia should be spending more. But Defence Minister Richard Marles has defended the move, saying it's the most significant increase in defence spending since the end of World War II. And golfing great Tiger Woods has confirmed he is in a relationship with Donald Trump's ex-daughter-in-law. Vanessa Trump was married to Donald Trump Jr. between 2005 and 2018, and they have 5 children together, including 17-year-old golfing sensation Kai, who competed at the same golf tournament a few days ago as Woods' son, Charlie. Now it's time to get into our deep dive this Monday with Sam Maiden, political editor at news.com.au. Now it's set to be one of the tightest election races in Australian history, with latest polling showing both the federal government and opposition are neck and neck. Latest research shows women, though, are now abandoning both major parties at an alarming rate, while young men are voting more conservatively. So what's sparking this major voter shake-up, and what does it mean for the upcoming election? Sam, thanks so much for joining us. This new study that has been released today is a fascinating insight into what is going on in the minds of many Australian voters right now. Interestingly, they say that both the Liberal and Labor Party are quickly losing the female vote. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, look, it's not a massive or a huge shift, but there does seem to be a bit of a shift to the Greens. And so the Greens don't seem to have a problem with the female vote, but it seems that Peter Dutton and to some extent the Labor Party does. And so I think that there is a lot of reasons for that. You know, cost of living is obviously one of those issues that people are pretty cranky about. And you are seeing that fragmentation of votes, whether it's people that are more Labor leaning going to the Greens or people are the more conservative leaning going to the Teal Independents.
And Sam, in regards to breaking this down, do you think not just cost of living, but for many female voters, there are issues with working from home, or that is flexible working hours, which has become a big election issue. And also there doesn't seem to be any real key difference in, although we know there's massive problems, in the childcare and or aged care industries?
Well, it's an interesting one. The work from home issue has really blown up, in part because the coalition got a little Trumpy on this the other day and basically said, we want all the public servants to come back to work, made it sound like some of them are travelling around the country in camper vans and doing their inverted commas work while they're going for a surf in Byron Bay or something. And they really painted this picture that this huge proportion of public servants aren't actually doing work when they're working from home. And it has to be said, like the number of public servants that are taking advantage of work from home has, I think it's tripled or something. It used to be 20%. It's now as much as 60%. Now, of course, they're not at home all the time, but the idea is that they're really taking advantage of that. Now, at first, I think that was an idea that could have some popularity. You know, people in the private sector thinking, yeah, I can't do that. Why should public servants be able to do that? But the Labor Party has really successfully been able to flip that conversation into one about, well, hang on a minute, work from home actually is really good for women, for parents, you know, for dads as well as mums. And they've really shifted that debate around. The ACTU is really pushing it. And so it's moved into a different space where all of a sudden I think Peter Dutton is a bit on the defensive rather than on the offensive on this work from home issue. And he's almost already tried to kind of tone it down a bit, suggesting that rather than saying that he wants public servants in the office 5 days a week, that he wants it to get back down to that level where 20% were taking advantage of it pre-COVID rather than 60-odd% today.
Sam, we know the polls can always be wrong. There has been a school of thought that Mr Albanese has received more support in the first few months of this year compared to the end of last year. Do you think that's right? And if an election was held right now, it looks like Mr Albanese is in front, even slightly so.
Look, it depends on what poll you look at. There's a couple of things I would say about that. First of all along, I have been of the view that some of the polling has been over-egged or misreported by people that really need to get out the pendulum and count out the number of seats. Whenever you get a poll, say it's 51%, 50.5, whatever it is, that implies a uniform swing. Now, of course, swings are never uniform, but if, for example, you're looking at a 3% swing for the coalition, you put that on the pendulum, you look at the seats that fall within that range, and there's never been more than 8 to 10 seats in that range of 3%. So he'd need to do better than that. I know that might be a bit counterintuitive. People think, well, you get 50.5, surely you win. Not necessarily. It depends on the number of seats. It's happened before where Kim Beazley won the popular vote in the election against John Howard when they had the GST election, but even though he beat John Howard a number of votes, did not have enough seats to form government. So that's the first thing. I think that Peter Dutton's always been a better chance at perhaps minority government. I don't think there's any polling that's ever suggested Peter Dutton was a red-hot chance of a majority government. Same goes for the Prime Minister, though. Can't see any polling that suggests he's going to retain a majority because he's on a real knife edge already. And so I think that, yes, the polls, depending on which poll you look at, suggest that Anthony Albanese is improving. It's still pretty tight, and within the margin of error, you wouldn't want to make too many assumptions about that. But it does lean towards the general overarching, I suppose, orthodoxy, which is that a minority Labor government is the most likely outcome at this stage based on current polling. And that would mean he would have to form government with the crossbench, the Greens and what have you. But, you know, it's not over until it's over. And so there's plenty of room for things to change during an election campaign.
And as we know, anything can happen right up until the election eve. Sam, in regards to, we know there's an issue, it seems, with this latest report with the female vote, and many are going to the Greens. Can we break down what is happening in particular with young male voters? Because very interestingly, one may have suggested they were traditionally Labor voters. Now it seems they've gone quite the opposite to the far right in light of what's happening in US politics at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. And it's not just about US politics, but obviously people point to that. We've had some really interesting reporting on news.com where we talk about the lad vote. And the suggestion is that the lad vote is going more conservative and they really like Peter Dutton. You know, they find that he's been talking to them a lot about even saying things that, you know, some women might find controversial about this idea that he was saying that men in the workplace now feel like in some cases they're being overlooked for jobs that they actually think they should have a crack at because of this rise of diversity. We've seen a huge debate about that in the US where they're trying to say everybody who's basically female or not non-Caucasian is a diversity hire. Now, that's obviously pretty offensive, but obviously Peter Dutton is tapping into this idea that perhaps the pendulum has swung too far. And I think that that's a really interesting idea about where Peter Dutton is going to get his support from, what that's going to lead to. And I mean, I've written before that if you're going to say, for example, that Scott Morrison has a women problem, you have to ask the question sometimes, does Anthony Albanese have a man problem? Why is it that men aren't supporting the Labor Party in the way that they did in the past? And it's a really interesting debate, I think. And you can never assume, sometimes people make assumptions that younger voters are going to vote a certain way and that younger means left wing. But these polling is making it really clear that that's not the case. And it's not homogenous either. Everybody has different views. You get young people that are voting Labor, left, independent and everything in between. But it's an interesting idea, I think, that we've got this younger generation coming through that are actually in some ways really attracted to conservatism and Peter Dutton.
In regards to the election, Sam, as we mentioned earlier, anything can happen over the next couple of weeks. Do you think cost of living will be the top issue for people, or do you think, depending on what may happen, something else could then end up being the number one consideration for voters heading to the polls?
No, I think cost of living is number 1, 2 and 3. And this is not just based on instinct, it's based on real polling. And when they look at the top 3 issues for voters, they are cost of living, housing is also a factor, and healthcare. And when you look at all those 3 things, they're all really connected to cost of living. But cost of living by far and away the number 1 issue. And then housing is a really important one. So it's a really interesting debate about whether, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why there's support going to the Greens, because they've been so loud about the issue of reform on that policy area. And then healthcare, that's obviously one that the government's trying to address in a big way with the $8 billion spend on Medicare and the $25 payment for PBS medicines. And you think about the fact that the last time PBS medicines cost $25 was 20 years ago. It is an incredible thing and it's expensive, it has an impact on the budget. And, we are in deficit. Perhaps sometimes we should have a bit more of a debate about whether that's worth it in terms of its impact to the budget. But, that's where we are. They obviously want to tackle cost of living and that's what they're doing.
Sam, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That was Sam Maiden, the political editor for news.com.au. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us so you don't miss our episodes or our deep dive of the day. You can also follow us on our socials, on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. You just need to search Listener Newsroom, which is spelled LISTNR. And we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company. See you tomorrow afternoon.